Welcome to Put a Word on It, a podcast presented by Men of Valor. In each episode, we're going to talk with a different man, but each one with a unique journey from brokenness to freedom. I'm your host, Rudy Kalis. I spent over 40 years as a TV sportscaster, then retired and joined the Men of Valor program as a volunteer. So join the conversation. Reconciling men to God, their families, and society. Welcome to another edition of Put a Word on It, brought to you by Interstate AC. Great folks, thank you for all of your support. I want you to meet a man who just breaks the mold. You just look at him, David Miller, and you say to yourself, here's a wonderful guy who's had a great life and no problems at all. My goodness, sometimes something can happen that can just shatter everything. And that's why he's such a fascinating story, and how he came here to Men of Valor, how God orchestrated his life to make a huge impact on even the room that we're standing in. Here's a great interview that I enjoyed a great deal. David Miller. A good life growing up, mom, dad, good family life?
Yes, stable family, 3 sisters, never was in trouble at school or with the law. And I didn't know God, by the way. We went to church every Sunday, but it didn't sink in. My wife and I, Christ was not a part of our lives. And I graduated in engineering, took a job out in Southern California. And that took me overseas and then back to Houston. And so I'm in Houston 11 years later. And I got a call from a guy that I played basketball at the Y with, who was a very wealthy man and real estate developer. And he said, well, we'd like to talk to you about a job. And so I accepted the invitation. I had closed my office door and said a prayer. For the first time, really prayed and told God, I'm sorry. This just happens. Told God that I didn't understand it, but I wanted to know. So I don't know if you know the Westheimer in Houston. It's a major boulevard, 8-lane boulevard. And I was driving down Westheimer and just was overcome. I had to pull off I was weeping so bad I couldn't see where I was going. So I had to pull off the road, and I accepted Christ. Not knowing where I was headed, not knowing why I was headed to an interview that, by the way, this is 1985, or 1986, when the economy in Houston was in the toilet. And so there's no quitting a good job in engineering, because we'd already laid off actually about 1,000 people. And I gave it to God. And ended up taking that job.
Help me though, how does that go from that, and you've given your life to Christ, to all of a sudden being incarcerated?
Oh my gosh. Well, this man that I went to work for was very gifted. He was a Rhodes Scholar. He was an All-American football player from Texas. He also, everything he touched in business turned to gold. But he had when I came along, he had just rejected Christ, rejected this whole idea. He was seeking, but decided it wasn't for him. So I ended up having an opportunity. A realtor sat down with me, good friend, said, hey, there's this project in Nashville, Tennessee, you ought to take a look at. And I went to my then boss, said, would you like to do a project in Nashville? He says, no. But, if you really want to, things are tough here, so, have at it. I thought that I would get that going. I didn't know about real estate development. I learned a little, obviously, from him some. I thought I had enough money in my bank account to last for 6 months without a paycheck. So I left that firm and worked on this project full time. Well, it took 2 years. That led me to 2008 and 2009, when the whole real estate market here, like most places, just was really in a bad way. Mortgages that I had started being called along with everybody else. And the feds were looking for people that had, created this problem. The FBI knocked on my door and wanted to talk to me. And so I wasn't there, but, my wife said, so I called him back, said, what do you need? And I went and talked to him. And so they were laying out this thing about this particular individual that had gone to the Brentwood Police Department and filled an affidavit that I'd stolen $500,000 from him. And I never heard from Brentwood about that. I didn't know about that for 3 years. But the feds got a hold of that and said, you own this piece of property with this man, and you took it and used it to borrow money that he didn't know about. And then use that money to work on another project, not that piece of property that he didn't know about. And can you explain yourself? I said, well, first of all, I got permission in writing from him to use that property, borrow. He knew, of course. He was there at the closing of the loan. He was there when it was paid off. And here's the emails that I kept him posted on what was being done. We thought that after that interview, it just went away. They were threatening to indict me. Okay. Year passed, nothing happened. But then, day before my birthday, following year, that I was indicted on 6 charges and related to bank fraud. And so I had to hire a good attorney, and that good attorney was able to go back to them with all the documentation saying, if you pursue this, you're going to look like fools. Next day, they dropped the indictment. A week later, superseding indictment, all new charges. Same thing. Went back and showed that none of this is true. And so they dropped that indictment. A month later, another superseding indictment. They just weren't going to let go. I asked my attorneys, why is all this happening? They said, well, you've become the poster boy for white collar crime. And, it's hard to win against the feds. So we lost. And I went to prison.
That must have been incredibly embarrassing to walk into a prison.
I guess probably the strongest feeling was not embarrassment, was fear of the unknown, fear of physically, and fear for my family. My wife's got to survive through this. Our kids stepped up and got that and really helped out a lot in that process.
Yet in the middle of all that, Raul gets a hold of you.
Well, so my wife, she said that, you need to call this guy named Raul Lopez. And I said, who's Raul Lopez? Well, it's a group called Men of Valor. Well, in prison, you can't Google and find out what that is. I can only depend on what she had found out. She says, no, I think it's something you might be interested in. So I said, okay. So they set up a time, and I had to call Raul. And at the end of that phone call, he offered me a job. I mean, only God. Went to work for Men of Valor while I was on with the ankle bracelet around my foot. Raul walks into my office, second or third day I was there, still trying to figure out what my pencil drawer was. And he had some drawings, construction concept plans under his arm. And he says, Dave, do you know anything about this stuff? I said, yeah, I'm an engineer and was a real estate developer for decades. So I can read those documents. Well, I immediately got the hat to figure out this campus. Our founder, Carl Carlson, had a vision for a campus for a long time. And they had just purchased this property a few months before I got there. However, Carl passed. I was hired just weeks after Carl passed. I think that's why I got hired.
And we look at this facility, and you've had such a hand in all of this, how God has brought the right people into Men of Valor, and in your expertise has brought this beautiful campus here. What a joy to be used by God.
Well, prison changed my heart in this way, that I have a heart for these guys that I wouldn't have had.
You understand.
Yeah. And so my background, has made me useful here in real estate development, obviously. And but I can relate to these guys, and so I feel very strongly that God has placed me here, and I fully in tune with that.
As you know, our name of our program is Put a Word on It. Is there a word in your heart?
Heart, actually.
Hmm.
So Proverbs 4:23 was my life verse during this time, still is. And, above all else, guard your heart, for it is a wellspring of life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my word is heart, and thank you for changing my heart.
It's a wonderful word. David, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Well, thank you.
Well, what do you think listening to him? What was so interesting to me is that, he does feel inside of him that he really wasn't supposed to be incarcerated, but yet he was there, and he said that literally brought him to Christ in a way that he never thought it could come. And that's why for him, the word heart just starts. That's where it all begins. From the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And now he speaks very openly about what happened to him. And look how he's been used to build this wonderful facility. Men of valor, God's hand has been in all of that. We sure did enjoy that. Well, thanks for joining us again next time. I hope you can, as we spend more time and put a word on it.